Welcome back, Weezy and Weeboos, to the channel to Double and Doge, where today a new set has come out in Eternal, and I basically want to review all the cards, because it's definitely an interesting one. Now, the issue is that I can only record on my laptop, since the recording software on my tablet, due to privacy reasons, they had to make a change that basically makes it so you can't hear anything. Like, it technically still does record sound, but it's basically impossible to hear. And yeah, I think I did upload one video where I tried to use it, and yeah, you could tell how bad it was. So I have to record on my laptop, and well, my laptop's version of Eternal is, I don't know what's wrong with it. Every time I click it, it just pretends to load for a split second, and then it never opens. I can't get it to open, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to do it in this really scuffed way, where I took a painstaking amount of time Google image searching, trying to find a decent quality image for each of the cards. We've got them all here, so I'm going to talk about all of them. So first of all, we got Jek Mercenary Hunter, who is a 3/2/3 in triple fire, so this is obviously made for mono fire, or at least mostly fire decks. You could definitely... I think that an underrated kind of strategy in Eternal is to make decks that are basically one colour but have a second colour because of Insignia. Because you can, with Insignia, it's basically, you're not losing any of the power, kind of. The main problem with like having multiple influence is that you don't get undepleted power as often, but as long as you only run two colours, Insignia is always undepleted. And it's really easy just to run like two other. Like, I remember, I've deleted it now because it's a bit old now, but I had a mono Justice deck, except it had a bit of Primal in it, and all I had was 2 Primal Sigils, 4 Horror Insignia, and the rest of it was all Justice, and that worked fine. I never had problems with not having enough Justice and all that. So yeah, anyway, sorry, I'm getting a little bit sidetracked, but the point is that I think that you can very much run this in 2-colour decks, as long as it's more fire than the other colour. But yeah, this is obviously supposed to be a mono card. Whenever the Jek hits the enemy player, create and draw a treasure trove, and summon. You may pay 1 and discard a card to deal 2 damage to 2 enemies. Jek gets double damage if it's a sigil. So I'm not going to lie, whether I think this card is good or not, relies heavily on something that I don't know the answer to, and that is, who deals that 2 damage? Is it you or is it Jek? Because by the wording it sounds like you, but it sounds weird that you would want to have this extra ability to give Jek double damage if it wasn't doubling the damage that you're doing with this ability. Because that matters, because if it's Jek that deals the 2 damage, then this becomes deals 4 damage to 2 enemies, which is a big deal. But if it's not like that, then I think this card is a resounding meh. Like, I do think you run it. I mean, it is obviously an above curve card, but I don't think it really pushes mono fire any further. I think it gets run in mono fire decks. It's good enough. It's just, I don't think it makes you want to play mono fire decks a whole lot more. It does improve it, but I think it's only a small improvement to the deck. Unless, of course, it does work that way, and discarding the sigil will give Jek double damage. I know the set is out, but it's 25,000 coins, and I've already spent 25,000 getting Whispers of the Throne, and now this has come up. I didn't think the next set would be another mini set. I assume that's because of, the whole coronavirus thing. Like, they probably did that so that they'd have another set out during this whole thing to keep us busy, but it has meant that I've really been struggling to keep up with the cards, because I've been saving Shiftstone for the next set, and now I've got all this Shiftstone and no gold, and it's all useless because I can't craft any of the cards. So I will have this set soon, but I haven't been able to play with any of the cards yet, even though the set has come out today. Oh, yesterday, but it was late yesterday, so for me it's like it's today. Anyway, so yeah, so obviously dealing 4 damage to 2 enemies, if that is what this does, is crazy. Even if you have to pay 1 extra and discard a card for it, that's amazing. Pardon me. Another thing that kind of gets me interested with this card, and this plays into the whole double colour thing, is Bullet Shaper has been a very competitive card for quite a while, and that's a fire justice thing. It gives you fire influence as well as justice influence, but the big idea is the fire influence for a mono fire deck. and it discards spells. So you might be able to run some kind of spell discard synergy deck. I don't think there's anything else in Rakano, though, except for Privilege of Rank that really gives you a big bonus for that. Technically, you also have Razon, but that's a small point of synergy, and really it's not going to be worth it, I don't think. Anyway, so yeah, if this is deal 4 damage to 2 enemies, that's amazing, because deal 4 damage at fast speed, which this isn't at fast speed, but still, deal 4 damage at fast speed for 4 is a fair card. So dealing 4 damage twice for 4 at slow speed, and getting a 2-3 with it, and also that 2-3 gets treasure troves every time you hit the enemy with it. And also, if the damage comes from Jack, that also means that you can hit face with the ability, and that will count as Jack hitting the opponent, and you'll get a treasure trove straight away. Yeah, it seems a lot... Again, this card, whether it's good or not, depends heavily on whether he gets double damage or not. The ability gets double damage or not when he gets the double damage from discarding a sigil. Even without that, as I say, it's still a decent card. I mean, although 2 damage isn't a big deal, bundling 2 bits of 2 damage together does make it a lot more valuable, and then bundling that on with a body. Again, it's a lot of bundle value, so maybe it works out. I don't know. I really liked the idea of running treasure troves before Flame Azulta came out. I was actually trying out a treasure trove deck with God of Omens, but after I've tried so many times to make treasure troves work, generally I think treasure trove cards just aren't that good. Zoe is obviously a good one, but he's a good one because you don't have to do anything to make him give you a bonus. He just gives you a treasure trove for drawing him. Any of these cards that you have to work to get the treasure troves, you usually never get enough time to play the treasure troves and not die. And usually you either get no treasure troves or way too many treasure troves with these kind of cards. So I don't think the treasure trove thing is that relevant, although it's not irrelevant. And if they add more spell reduction kind of cards to the game, spell cost reduction, besides just Tamaris and Garden of Omens, then maybe this whole treasure trove thing could become a real deck. Right, this is one of the ones I couldn't find a better quality image for, but this is Jek's Takedown, a card that I... Okay, it's probably not busted, but I really don't like this card existing. So, it's a 3-cost, deal 3 damage, either to the enemy player or an enemy site. So I misread this the first time, and I thought it was deal 3 damage to, like, any enemy, and I thought that, obviously, that was crazy busted. Luckily, it is only face or a site. Now, the reason why that's crazy busted is because if you have at least 4 fire influence, whenever the enemy player plays a spell, you draw this spell back from your void, which... that is scary. So I will give them this. It's very good design that they've made it so that it's only when the opponent casts a spell. It's something completely out of your control, which is a good thing, because an infinite damage source like this should not be something that is in your control always, because then you get OTK decks that just don't let the opponent play a turn, that just aren't fun at all. But still, this card is really annoying, because spells are just one of those things where... I would say in general, it's pretty safe to say in Eternal, there's not really a competitive deck out there that doesn't use spells. So, they're going to get this back no matter what. Even though you can control when, you can't really stop them from getting this back at all. Which means this is still kind of an infinite source of damage, it's just the speed at which it does it varies on how much pressure your opponent's under. And I don't like that. And I understand that sites are kind of overpowered in Eternal in general at the moment, but I don't like this as a site countering card as well, because it just completely shuts down sites. Like, it's really... If your opponent has one of these, you just may as well not have the sites. So yeah, I don't like this card, but overall I think it's obviously a good card. At the very least, this is only going to be in 2-color decks or mono fire, so... there's that. Hopefully not in 3-color decks, although I'm not going to lie, it is possible for 3-color decks to get enough influence fixing that they could run this, and I really would be scared if that becomes a thing, but I don't think that would be super competitive. Yeah, I didn't have much to say about that card. It's just you're going to run it in spell damage decks, basically, burn decks. You're going to run it in that the goddamn Skycrag deck with with Prodigious Sorcery. I hate that deck so much. I'm not going to lie, 9% of the reason why I've hated playing Eternal, like, although I loved it before, basically ever since Echoes of Eternity, although it started declining for me at Flame Azalta, is the Skycrag spell damage deck. It just feels so terrible to play against. Because for me, every time I played it, it's just been either I'm queuing into it and I'm aggro and I just win for free, or I queued into it and I'm control and I just lose and there's literally nothing I can do about it. It just feels like you're playing rock, paper, scissors, only you have to spend 10 minutes sitting down waiting to die. I really hate that deck more than probably any other deck in the entire game. Anyway, enough of me can play about that. Then there's Archmagister's Prophecy. And usually cards like this, I would say, are memes. But this one, while I'm not going to say it's super good, I think if any meme win the game crazy, stupid, powerful effect is going to make it into actual competitive play, this is going to be it. So this is a 2-cost Legendary Time Relic. And once per turn, you get to pay 1 to give a unit to give yourself 1 health and give a unit 1 health. And at the end of your turn, if you have 12 units with different combinations of attack and health, you just instantly win the game. And I don't know how that looks like when it happens, but I'm interested. So this is another card I don't really like existing, but I don't think it's going to be ridiculously strong, so there's that at least. And I do appreciate that this card isn't all the OTK. Like, yeah, the OTK is kind of the main draw of it, but honestly, a 2-cost relic that lets you pay 1 every turn to gain 1 health and give one of your units 1 health, that's actually a serious card in its own right. Like, it's not super strong, but Ancient Bubble isn't a bad card. It's kind of close to playable, and that's a 1-cost relic that lets you pay 1 each turn to gain 1 health. And that's only for yourself. This one actually gives you board presence. And as well as that, I don't think this is going to be a real thing, but like, it's possible that Reanimator decks, the health buff should be permanent, so you can just slowly build up the health of your units that keep coming back to life over and over again, just continuously with this. So it could be a slow kind of control-y card that like builds things up for you. But yeah, in terms of the combo, at first I thought, right, so basically that will never happen. Because I was thinking of Clock of Stolen Hours, which is a card I actually did try to make work, even though I really don't like combo decks. That was one that I actually was kind of interested in, because it seemed like a pretty easy combo to pull off to have 12 units. Like, I do that relatively regularly with, like, Rat Trap decks and all that, and I was going to run it in a Rat Trap deck anyway, so I thought, right, okay, I guess I'll do it. But what I didn't realise is when I read the ultimate, it said round start. I didn't realise how important that was. Almost always, if you have 12 units and you have Clock of Stolen Hours, your opponent can obviously see you have Clock of Stolen Hours and that you have 12 units, and they're going to kill one of them. And because most likely if you filled your board, a good amount of your units are going to be 1/1s, they're not going to have any trouble killing your units, unless you get really lucky. So yeah, so that's why I kind of looked at this and thought, nah, that's not going to happen. But then I read it again, and it said at the end of your turn. And I thought, oh, that's actually quite a big deal. Because it means that you could have a board, or a nearly full board of units with different attack and health, and your opponent wouldn't even know you're going to do this OTK. And then if you have enough power, you could play this, and then play a couple more units from your hand, and instantly you've done the OTK, you've won the game, like on the spot, and your opponent didn't even know you were going to do it. Which is going to be super annoying if it happens, but to be fair, there's at least the kind of predictability to it, because obviously it's a little bit suspicious to have a board of, like, nearly full board of all units of different attack and health. And obviously, if you have one that's just a bit off, you can use the ability to give units extra health so that it has, well, different attack and health. So yeah, I think, as I say, out of all these kind of crazy OTK combo things, I think this is the most likely to actually be competitively viable. I don't think it is going to be, though. I think where this is actually going to see play is it's just going to see play for its first ability, and in decks that can sometimes, once in a blue moon, get the second ability to work. I'm going to say maybe kind of a tier 3 kind of card. Maybe Xenon decks with, like, Mask... what is it? Mask of Torment? It's something along those lines. You know the one. that gets more power the more health you get. It seems strong. That seems like a strong combination. Yeah, this is another one we couldn't really get a good image of. Clock Tower Sentinel. 9, 12, 12 for time. At the end of your turn, each of your units get +1/+1. At the end of your turn, if Clock Tower Sentinel is in your void, units in your void get +1/+1. So this is actually more interesting than it looks at first, because the general consensus from what I've heard so far from people seeing this card is this is too vanilla. This belongs in like set 1. Like, it's a lot of stats, but it's not going to win you the game. And I see where they're coming from, and I think it's close to succumbing to that issue. But I actually think this card has value outside of that, and I think this is actually a card that could see competitive play. But again, I don't think it's a high tier card. I think it belongs in a similar place to Archmagister's Prophecy, even though it belongs to a completely different deck. I think that this card is actually going to be decent. Because, okay, so the first thing that makes you think it's going to be bad is you see 9 and 12, 12, and you think, right, it's going to have an ability that's not that big a deal, because it has such a ridiculous stat line. And that means that this is going to be a card that you play after all that waiting. You're going to play it on turn 9, and your opponent's just going to annihilate it, and they paid 2 to kill a 9 drop, and you get no compensation. Now, obviously that is a situation that sucks, but you do actually get some compensation, because the fact that it gives all your units +1/+1 at the end of turn means if you have enough units on the board and you develop this onto the board, then you're not actually losing that much value. You're drawing a kill spell out of them and you're buffing your entire board. Now obviously that's still not great for 9, but I think that's enough compensation to mean this card isn't just dead in the water. I think this, so that's kind of my precedent for saying this card isn't completely out of the realm of being competitively viable. Then from there, obviously, if this doesn't die, this is an absolute powerhouse, and it can smash through basically any blockers. If you can give this Overwhelm, they've basically lost. So there's that. But here's the big thing that seems intriguing to me. I'm surprised no one's really brought up Stirring Sand with this card. I believe that's what it's called. I've actually never played with it myself, and I've only gone against Stirring Sand decks a couple of times. But I do know in the past that it was quite a strong deck. I think it was tier 1 at one point. Basically to run a deck where you discarded Sentinels, like Heart of the Vault, big Sentinels, and then you play Stirring Sand, which I believe was a 4-cost time card, where you could pay 4 to play a Sentinel from your void, and for each Explorer you had, you could pay an extra 2 and exhaust them to play another one from your void. That with this card is amazing, because of course, not only is this a massive Sentinel you can get out of the void super early and do disgusting things with, but on top of that, once he goes into the void, he's going to be buffing all your other Sentinels so that when you bring them back, they're also going to be gigantic. So I do think this card has potential. Now, having that been said, like, I have said all this good stuff about it. I am not saying this is actually a super good card. I'm just trying to kind of defend the little guy a little bit over here. I think, again, this might be good enough for a kind of tier 3-ish kind of deck. I definitely think people are underrating this. That doesn't mean I think it's overpowered or anything. It's definitely not top tier material. It just has too many weaknesses. Oh yeah, and one last thing I'd just like to say is it's very easy to underestimate pure stats in this game. I don't blame anyone for doing it, because I do find myself falling into the trap kind of mindset of, well, if it just has stats and that's its big thing, then it sucks. Because to be fair, that is usually right. But I've been playing more decks recently with like big meaty units, and they've been doing really well, and I've kind of been realising recently that I've been undervaluing just how good it is to have pure stats on the board, as long as you've got a backup plan for if they do get killed. Because honestly, anything that's bigger than 6/6 is just like an impenetrable wall most of the time, again, as long as they don't have a kill spell. And if you have the countermeasures so that you either get some kind of compensation if they have a kill spell, or you can negate it or something like that, then these cards are really strong, these like just massive body cards. Then there's Silverblade Intrusion, which I think might be a little bit crazy, but it's kind of hard, because these abilities almost feel like they don't mix together. So this is the kind of Mono Justice spell card. It's a 1-cost spell, it's fast, and it gives 2 of your units invulnerable to damage for that turn. And if you have 5 Justice Influence, you create and draw a 3/3 Valkyrie Denouncer, which, if you don't remember that card by name, it's the 5/3/3 Flying Revenge card in Argenport colours. And if the enemy player has 4 or more cards in their hand, you get to play one as well. So you get 1 in your hand and you get 1 instantly onto the board for free. Now, I watched Loco Pojo talk about these cards, and he mentioned something that I haven't been able to test out myself yet, because again, I haven't got these cards yet. I should have them in a couple of days. And that is that, according to this wording, if you're running just Justice and no Shadow Influence, when you create and draw the Valkyrie Denouncer, you wouldn't be able to play it because you would need Shadow Influence. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that that's not actually what's going on here, and they just decided that it'd be too much text to specify that they remove the influence requirements from it. I imagine they probably do. I imagine that when you draw them out, Valkyrie Denouncer, you don't actually need any influence for it. But yeah, technically, according to this wording, you would need Shadow Influence for this, so I don't know what's going on with which way it goes. But anyway, so this card seems kind of crazy, because at first I was just like, yeah, that seems solid. It's a pretty weak effect as the normal thing, but that like 5 Justice Influence thing is pretty strong. It gives you a lot of late game value and all that, especially for a 1-cost card. But then I realised, wow, the first effect actually is really strong. I'm so used to invulnerable to damage just being in a complete like draft mechanic, and like not really anything else, like not something you can use in Constructed. But this actually is serious, I think. Like, okay, Metal, which, yes, isn't super playable in Constructed, but is a good draft card, is this, except there's no benefit for if you have 5 influence, and also you only give 1 of your units invulnerable to damage. This gives 2 of your units. This can be used defensively as well, so you can have just these turns where you can pull up an impenetrable wall for a turn, for only 1 power, at fast speed as well, so you can catch people out with it and kill their units without them killing off yours and trading. So yeah, this actually seems like a pretty strong card. And obviously, once you get to the 5 influence part, that's just giving you a whole bunch of value. I'm just thinking what kind of deck this fits into. I know there's definitely one that it fits into. I've been running... I made a little like kind of homebrew, although it's not that original, Argenport control deck, which basically runs a Caria, it runs a DE, and it runs a couple Dizo's Office, and it runs a Regent's Tomb in the Market. And that card's actually been doing surprisingly well. I almost got to Masters for the first time last season, despite how much I been hated playing it and how many games I've been losing to like Skycrack and all that. I almost made it to Masters with that deck. I think that Argenport Control, leaning more towards Justice and playing Saditi, is a really strong deck, and this definitely fits into that deck. I'm not sure where else it fits. It could certainly go into a kind of a version of that's Horu instead of Argenport, but still kind of focusing on 5 influence cards. But yeah, I'm not really sure where this goes besides that. It is a strong card though. Anywhere it does go, it will be very strong. Ladder, Svetya's Advisor. So this is probably the most powerful card in the set. As I said, I've already watched Loco Pocho talk about these cards, and he was saying he really doesn't like sights, so he's not all too enthralled about this card. And I've got to say, I like sights quite a lot in this game. I think they're very, very good like design. The problem is that they're very hard to balance, and that means that in Eternal, a lot of sights are either ridiculously strong or ridiculously pathetically weak. This card, I must admit though, this card has Eternal just opened. Okay, it has been almost an hour since I tried to open Eternal, and now it's opening. What? Okay, so I guess it was loading the whole time. Oh god, I clicked it like 7 times. I hope it's not going to open it like 7 times. Well, anyway, so we're just going to continue this way because I've set it up this way anyway. So yeah, this is a 3/2/4 in Justice, and it only requires 1 Justice influence. That is a big deal. That means you can easily run this in 3-color decks, and you could probably even stretch and run this in 4-color decks, which is a big deal because it means you can run this with a whole lot more sites than you could otherwise. And when you play a site, it gets +1 health. Yeah, that's alright. Honestly, a 3/2/4 when you play a site, it gets +1 health may have been good enough. Like, probably it would have been on the weak side, but that may have been good enough. Especially for some sites with lower health total, you could run an Ixtun deck with, like, Garden Vermins, and you could get it to, like, 3 health, because obviously 2 health's pretty low health for that site. But obviously that's because that site's ridiculously powerful. Oh, no. How do I need to stop this. Wow. I can't be bothered to cut this out, so I'm sorry. You're gonna have to suffer through this. Blech. Right. So yeah. Sorry about that. So yeah. At the end of your turn, advance your site's agenda. That is insane. That is actually crazy. Like, as I say, I love sites, but I think this might be taking it a bit too far. They could at least make this unit a lot smaller, but no, that's a decent stat line too. This is just crazy. Okay, so, like, straight away, Korovyet Palace is an amazing site. You only need to run Primal with the Justice, so you don't even have to go that far out of your colours. Already, that's an amazing combo with this card. You can give this +4/+4 in Endurance and draw 2 cards instantly, and then give it Berserk the next turn. Pretty crazy. And obviously then, if they haven't killed it by the next turn, not only do you get the Berserk, but then you'll also get the Svetya. Which is, again, pretty crazy. I assume that's how it's going to work at least. I assume that if all the spells have been cast, and then you end your turn again, it will summon the unit instantly. Anyway. But then you can also stretch out to try and include this in other things. There's also Regent's Tomb, which only requires 1 Justice and 1 Shadow. So again, that fits easily into 3-color or 4, even 4-color decks. That one's especially interesting because Regent's Tomb is a bit of an interesting site because most sites, you don't really care that much what unit gets summoned if you complete the agenda. You mostly just care about the spells on the agenda. But Regent's Tomb is the one exception where, because it's relatively cheap, and because the unit you get off of it is so gigantic and game-ending, you really care about completing Regent Tomb's agenda. And this card, with Regent's Tomb, seems really strong, especially because one of Regent's Tomb's weaknesses is that all-important 2 health, which is obviously, again, a pretty low amount for a site to have. It makes it very vulnerable. And this would put it into a pretty safe range to not die. So yeah, this card just seems busted. I mean, I want to say more about it, but I mean, that's just about all I have to say. There's also the triple colour sites. That I'm not as sure will be good. Its Ultra Arcanum would definitely be decent with this card, but I just don't think that's really necessary, because this is actually something I wish I made a video about it now, but this is actually something I'm pretty proud of. I remember the day before the Flame Azulta dropped, I was preaching in the Discord, the Eternal Discord, about how Zulta Arcanum's going to be one of the strongest sites ever in the entire game, and it might even be better than Korovyet Palace and all that. And a lot of people were naysaying me, and a lot of people were saying that it wasn't going to be that strong, it was too expensive, and a lot of people were saying that the 3-cost site was going to be better. Which, to be fair, the 3-cost site even surprised me. Even though I thought the Zulta Arcanum was going to be better, I did think the 3-cost site was going to be good, and then it turned out not that good. I'm on about Outcast Fortress, the Justice Primal Shadow, the purpose one. Anyway, but yeah, and basically I was saying the reason why Zulta Arcanum is such an amazing card, and the way I managed to predict that it would be as strong as it was, although it did take a while for it to take off. I actually was scared at first, when it first released, that it wasn't actually as good as I thought, because I was struggling to make it work. I wasn't going for the right kind of build. I was going for control and not tempo. And it didn't work out that well. But then obviously later on, Zulta Arcanum took off. But yeah, the reason why it's such a busted site is because it summons blockers for itself. And when it released, it had 5 health. Like, the problem is, how does your opponent kill the site? Like, yeah, Harmony of Flame is a practically useless spell on that site. And yeah, Bren isn't the best unit to get summoned from it because he gives you power when you've already got a ridiculous amount of power and you probably need cards instead. But there's just so much bundle value there. You're getting 4 cards in one for 7 power, and 2 of those cards are really good. 2 of those cards give you, they let you draw cards, summon minions, and give you health. And as I say, Zoltar Arcanum is almost impossible to kill, not only because it has so much health, but because it has Zoltar Convoy on its agenda, which is ridiculous, because that summons 2 blockers for the site. You can play Zoltar Arcanum on an empty board, and it is probably not going to die. Because you're going to summon 2 blockers, and on top of that, those 2 blockers can't be stunned, can't be exhausted, and even if they attack, they get to block as well, because again, endurance, and they can't be killed by spells because they have Aegis. And obviously, if your opponent uses 2 spells to kill them, then they're using 2 spells on a 2/2. You really don't care about that. You've won at that point. So yeah, sorry, I did have to go on a bit of a rant there, but that explains why I think that this with Zoltar Arcanum isn't actually that great, because you're probably going to complete the entire Zoltar Arcanum agenda before it breaks anyway. I don't think you need this with Zoltar Arcanum, especially because it's a later game site. I don't think accelerating its agenda is as big a deal. It definitely doesn't care about the extra health. It has enough as it is. The only time it's relevant is if your opponent has big flyers that can take care of the site, in which case, yeah, this is relevant. But I don't think it's as strong with Zoltar Arcanum. Bastion of the Dawn, if it was any good for anything, then sure, it would be a great combo, that, but Bastion of Dawn is just so useless. I was so excited to see the Time Justice Primal site, and then it just turned out to be so bad. I just wish it was a little bit stronger. But of course, you could try it out with the whole Yojimba deck with like the negating silence. That could be interesting, and I definitely hope that turns out to be good, although I'm not holding my breath for it. And there's also the 3-cost site we mentioned before, which, although this doesn't quite curve into it perfectly, it is a decent curve, and that could get you a ridiculously early Zelia. I don't think it's the best option, but I do think that's also a solid option. And of course, there's even the idea of running this with sites that don't even have Justice in its colours, if you're wanting to go for more kind of harder decks, you know, decks that you have to use more kind of influence with to get this working. Although I can't really think. The only one that I'm thinking is maybe a Fire Justice Primal Shadow deck with the Den of Ordeals, because that site is ridiculous if you complete its agenda, but it's really bad if you don't, and it's hard to complete its agenda. So this could work with that, but obviously, if you have to go into 4 colours, it means you're going to have to put in a lot of work to make it, well, work. But it can work, so it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Anyway, I've talked a lot about this card, but as I say, I think this is the strongest card in the set, so I think it definitely deserved all that monologue. So yeah, busted, probably tier 1. I don't know what deck it goes into that's tier 1, but it's got to go into a tier 1 deck. Maybe not this set, but definitely in a set or two's time, if not this set. Anyway, wow, here we are. Actually, on to the next card. We actually got past that. Mother of Skies, 2/1/4 flying. The first time you play a multi-faction unit each turn, play a 1/2 Cloud Snake with flying. So the first time I saw this card, I must admit, I got pretty mad, and I was like, this is so busted. Why are they making Elysian Flyers even crazier? But then I took a step back, and I'm like, actually, this is fair. Like, yeah, it's probably good enough in the Elysian Flyer deck. Yeah, it probably makes it a little better. But honestly, this card isn't busted. Because, well, although multi-faction units are very strong, if you're running an aggro deck, and obviously I'm talking about flyers here, but we don't have to be talking about flyers. This also applies to other 2-coloured decks. But if you're running an aggro deck, you almost have to be in mono or double colours, because it's just so hard to get consistent undepleted power in triple colours, which means that you're probably going to be playing this in double colours or mono. Well, you're not going to be playing this in mono. No. You're going to be playing this in double colours. This requires 2 influence, so it's going to be a little bit awkward as well. And then on top of that, if you're playing this in double colours, then there aren't there isn't as much of a choice of multi-faction units. In a 3-faction deck or a 4-faction deck, you see loads of... You may not even run any mono-coloured units. You may run only multi-faction units. But in a Legion of Flyers and in a lot of other 2-colour aggro decks, you're probably going to be running a whole lot less of the 2-colour units because you have a much more thin selection of them. And I'm just thinking, what actual time primal units do you run in the Elysian Flyers deck? There's that 2/1/1 ambush that eventually gives Flyers Aegis. And it's only units as well, so it won't count Majestic's guys, it won't count Sodi's Spell Shaper. I sometimes run the 3-drop Sodi in Elysian Flyers, but that's mostly just for fun. I don't think that's actually the competitive thing, so you don't really do that. And you don't really run Ela and Mizo, because, well, they don't fly. So, yeah, I don't think this actually fits in that well with Elysian Flyers. Like, it goes in there, but I think this only makes it into some lists, and it might not even really be an improvement. It is strong to have such a hard-to-kill unit with flying that summons more units with flying, especially when we have Majestic Skies, but I think its ability is going to be harder to trigger than we think. Now, turn to Seed. This one, okay, so I don't want to bring it up too much, but as I said, I watched Pojo talk about these cards, and this one really confused me, because this seems like a very solid card to me, but Pojo was saying that this card is basically terrible, that this is all the worst aspects of things like Reign of Trogs and Polymorph, and I think it's an improvement over those cards, because, okay, yes, it's double influence. That's not preferable, but it's not that hard to get double influence. You get double influence for Wisdom of the Elders and all that. Triple influence would be an issue, but it's only double. And for 3, it is a slow spell, but you choose an enemy unit and you transform it into a 0/2 seed, and as well as all the copies on the board, and all the copies in their hand, all the copies in their deck, all the copies in their void. Now, the reason why Pojo was saying that this is worse than Polymorph, even though it gives you a unit with no attack, and it transforms all copies wherever they are, as long as they're enemy copies. The reason he said that this is bad is because the seeds actually have a secret ability. And I feel like he massively overrated this ability. So the seeds, although they are just 0/2s, if they are left alone for 5 turns, they get +5/+5 and overwhelm, so they become 5/7 overwhelms. Now, yes, 5/7 overwhelms are terrifying, and if this, in most situations, I would agree with Pojo that from there that, oh yeah, this card probably isn't that good then, because although you get a lot of time, you are playing a control deck, you're probably going to be going for the late game, this doesn't help you in the late game. But then, you got to remember, 5 turns, like 5 is a lot of turns. That is a lot of turns. There's a decent chance that you will have just happened to play a Hailstorm at that point anyway and killed all the seeds. And yeah, they could have more in their hand and then play those out, but then they got to wait even longer for those ones to hatch another 5 turns. It's like, I don't think realistically in most games their seeds are actually going to hatch. And if you assume that the seeds aren't going to hatch, this is an upgraded Polymorph that also becomes a Rain of Frogs, but for 3. And the only downside is that you have to run a little bit extra primal, which seems really good. I don't think this card is busted, but I think this is a solid option for any primal control deck. I think this mostly isn't busted because, well, I think this is just a better Polymorph in almost every situation. I don't actually think Polymorph is that strong. It's good enough, but to see competitive play, but it's not like super strong. So I would say that this card probably, I would say that I'm going to confidently say this will definitely make it into at least a tier 3 competitive deck or something like that. I think it will probably make it into a kind of tier 2 kind of area. There's a chance it makes it into some kind of tier 1 deck, but I'm a little bit more skeptical of taking it that far. Because, again, it is kind of a conflicting kind of game plan. Oh, I want to control the board, but I'm giving my opponent a unit that will eventually become probably bigger than the thing that I originally transformed. But as well as that, for some decks it's really easy to deal with just pure stats, but not as easy to deal with abilities. And, well, if all the units just have pure stats, they're really susceptible to permafrost. again, that's not ideal. You don't want to have to play one spell to turn a unit into something and then one spell to permafrost it later. But I'm just saying it kind of gives you flexibility. You can do it that way. And this is after you get 5 turns to draw a bunch of cards and assess the situation as well. Dizizo. Dizo, Cabal Racketeer, 3/1/4 unblockable. Summon, you may spend power equal to an enemy unit's attack to steal that unit while you have Dizo. Oh god, I hate that this card exists. So yeah, this card's really good. This card's probably busted. This card is probably like top tier material. And I hate that. This card is flexible. It carries weapons super well. It gets rid of blockers with ease. It's going to be amazing for any kind of aggro deck. This is just the top end for your aggro deck. There you go. Shadow aggro deck is complete. You just run 4 of these. It's even worse because it's not even like they get the unit back after that turn if you can't kill them in that turn. They have to kill Dizo to get the unit back. And while that could be seen as actually worse than stealing it for a turn because you might not guaranteed get the attack with that unit because they might kill the Dizo instantly. Well, the Dizo has 4 health. Like, dealing 4 damage in this game is actually kind of difficult. The most efficient way to deal 4 damage in this entire game is the display of impulse, at which point you're paying 3 to kill a 3-drop. You're basically trading even. The only thing that trades up against this card is Annihilate, and that's a really good card anyway that only targets specific cards. And that's also Shadow as well. Oh boy. Yeah, I get that you have to spend a lot of power to steal the enemy unit, but I don't think that really matters, because I think a 3/1/4 unblockable, although you wouldn't pay 2 Shadow inputs for it, a 3/1/4 unblockable on its own is not that bad. Like, in an aggro deck at least, because you can put weapons on it, and again, at 4 health, it is not going to die. Not unless they spend more resources than they should have to on a 3-drop. Meaning that you are going to have a good chance of ending the game even if you can't steal anything with this. But the big deal is, this is giving you so much flexibility for the top end of aggro, because aggro kind of how well it does depends a lot on the deck that it's going against. I think this is especially scary because mid-range is usually how you counter aggro. Mid-range obviously wants to slap big meaty units with loads of health onto the board before aggro can like get its final bursts of damage in to kill them. But then this steals those big meaty units. It's literally countering the counter to aggro. There's also some potential for this card to be in control. I don't see that as much, although I don't think it's a bad option per se, because this card is just so good. You can basically use this in anything, really, except probably combo decks. I mean, I don't think it's a smart idea to run this in mid-range, but maybe if you've got a deck that actually has a bunch of synergy with it, it's actually worth it. Oh, this one isn't actually a very good image. I thought it was better than this. Okay, well, we can't get a good look at this one, but I know what it does. Silverblade Menace is a 4/3/3 flyer, and of course it needs double Shadow Influence, and when you play it, you deal 1 damage and gain 1 health. Deal 1 damage to the enemy and gain 1 health for yourself for each spell in the enemy's void, and it's a Nightmare Valkyrie. So, again, I don't like to bring this up too much because I like to take my own spin on things, but I think it's important to address it. As I said, I've watched Pojo's video on this, and he actually made a really good point. I was kind of thinking this, but he said it better than I could. There used to be Umbran Reaper, which, of course, was a 5/1 with flying, that when it died dealt 5 damage to the opponent and gave you 5 health. And that card's kind of become too slow in recent times, even though it's supposed to be like a really good card and it is quite strong. This card coming out 1 turn earlier and also having the effect happen instantly rather than happening later, even though it's going to have a much worse. It's not going to have anywhere near as good a chance at burning your opponent to death with just face damage, and although it's not going to have as strong an effect on in most situations, this is basically the new Umbran Reaper for us. Just because the old Umbran Reaper is probably, at least not for a while, going to be able to see play because it's just going to be too slow. This 1 turn is probably going to be crucial that it comes out earlier. Now, of course, the difference here is that the damage is dependent, and the health gain is dependent on the amount of spells the opponent plays. You can almost always count on, by the time you play this, they probably have 1 to 3 spells in their void, which is alright. But I must say that one reason I do actually quite like this card is that I feel like it's designed to counter the Skycrag spell damage deck, which I've already voiced my concerns about. And I don't think it does an amazing job of that, but it helps, and I'm not going to complain about something that helps. I need all the help I can get against those decks. So yeah, I think you run this. I don't think you run that many copies of it, but I think you run it. As I say, it's just... You don't really care about the face damage, I don't think, too often. You might be running an aggro deck that actually does, but I don't think you would. I think you more care about the health gain, and the face damage is just a nice little bonus you get. And honestly, a 3/3 flyer, it's easy to forget when there are some cards in the game that are just so stupid, like the Justice card, the Valkyrie Enforcer, the 3/3 with the flying that gets bundled with a silence. With cards like that, you can sometimes forget that a 3/3 flying, a 3/3 flying is actually a decent stat line, and a 4/3 flying with a bonus is not that bad. So again, I think this card's competitively viable, but it's on the very low end of that. I think it's going to see more play than it would otherwise, mostly just because I think this health game is going to be very needed in the current meta. But overall, I still don't think, even with its relevance, like this effect being relevant, it's going to be that strong. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention its tags. It's a Nightmare Valkyrie. That might be important. I'm doubting it though. I am kind of interested in, with these new Nightmare Valkyries, maybe Vox Nurturing Sadist actually becomes a bit more of a serious card. Because I found that I can't find enough Nightmares to make that card work. But Nightmare Valkyries are nightmares that also have decent stat lines for the most part, so maybe that works out. Speaking of Nightmare Valkyries, here's the big card that started all the reveals. It's Ikaria First Reaper. And this is a weird card. 6/5/5, it requires 6 Shadow Influence. This is the most we've ever seen needed for one kind of influence to play a card. Flying deadly, and when you play it, you kill an enemy unit or site, and when it dies, the enemy player discards every spell in their hand. And of course it's a Nightmare Valkyrie. So, this, as I say, this card is weird. Because it's easy to look at this and just be like, yeah, that's crazy busted, easily wins the game. 10 out of 10. Tier 1 card. Auto-include an all Mono Shadow. Well, it is auto-include an all Mono Shadow because Mono Shadow needs all the bonuses it can get for going into full influence. But do I think this card makes Mono Shadow a whole lot better? Well, I do think it improves it, but I think it's kind of similar to Jack, although this is going to do a better job than Jack. I think it's a similar issue, though, to Jack, where I don't think it actually makes it that much better. It's weird, because this is a super powerful effect. Like, you're paying 6, you're getting an amazing body, and you're killing an enemy unit. That is, in itself, is all worth it, and then if it dies, they discard all spells in their hand. The problem is, how does this win you the game? And that's actually an important question. Like, you might just say, well, I don't know, killing a unit and having a big thing on the board, that seems to win the game, but, like, it's going to take a bit. Like, saying that imagining that they still have, like, about 20 or 25 health by the time you play this, you would need to attack with this about 4 times to kill the opponent from there. And, again, although you're defending yourself with the kill thing, that doesn't actually win you the game, it just stops you from losing. Now, the thing is, at the same time, it's really hard to card this card, just say, oh no, it's not good enough. Because, well, it is really, really strong as a defensive card, even though it doesn't win you the game. I mean, it's supposed to be, it's so deep in the influence. And another thing that just makes this so hard to evaluate is we've never had an ability like this in Tomb, and it's so hard to say whether that's a very small icing on the cake or actually an extremely relevant ability. Because in late game kind of control mirrors, sacrificing this to trigger its Entomb could be crazy valuable. You could discard massive amounts of cards, especially because control decks especially like to have big spells that they need to keep themselves alive, and you could just get rid of them all. But then sacrificing a 5/5 body feels pretty bad. And as well as that, most spells are fast, and if they're fast, that means that before they get discarded, the opponent has a chance to play them, and that feels a lot worse. And then what if they don't have any spells in their hand? Then you'd have to know they have spells in their hand, and it's so weird. And again, so the reason why I'm saying that this needs to win you the game is it costs 6. Like, I've very much come to realise over time while playing Eternal, like I always knew this in the back of my head, but now I've basically kind of figured it out completely. I've always known that a lot of expensive units don't see play unless they do something that basically wins you the game, or stops you from losing the game extremely often. And I found that the threshold is essentially anything that costs 5 or more power. At 5 power, it's a kind of grey area where you can get away with a little bit of this isn't really winning you the game, but it's going to help you out a lot. But once you get to 6, for a 6 cost card to be good, it has to be winning you the game. Grotto Stranger doesn't exactly win you the game instantly, but it gives you so many cards that you kind of slowly win the game. And as well as that, it ramps you, so it kind of, it thins your deck a little bit. It gives you more power to get to your other win conditions, and so there's that. It's a good example of like a more than 5 power card that actually is a decent card. Azindel, well, that card wins you the game because it summons a bunch of bodies that are all kind of threats. Like even the 1/1s, they're deadly and unblockable, which actually makes them a decent threat. He steals a bunch of cards from your deck for the opponent's deck, so that makes it a threat. Karaviet Palace, of course, that wins you the game because it gives units Berserk. Other sites, not so much. Den of Ordeals, although I like it, and although I don't think it's terrible, isn't really super competitively viable because the only way it wins you the game is you should complete the site's entire agenda when it's an expensive site with the most defensive ability it has being 3 damage. Yeah, so anyway, you get my point. At that point, you really got to be winning the game for a card to be good. But then, maybe this just doesn't need to win the game. Maybe this is just so strong it doesn't need to win you the game and you can still run it. It's kind of weird. I think that... Well, okay, so there's no surprise this is definitely going to be running Mono Shadow. I think that Mono Shadow is going to be definitely competitively viable, but I don't think it's going to be especially high tier. I can't really say anything more conclusive about this, to be honest. This one's really got me stumped. Auralian Supplier. Oh boy. So, I'm not sure about this card. Well, I do think it's good, but I'm not sure this card's going to be very fun to deal with. It's definitely not anywhere near as bad, but it's given me a little bit of Divine Favour vibes. I think that was what it was called. The 3 cost card in Hearthstone that lets you draw cards until you have as many as you have as your opponent has. Anyway, so yeah, this is a 3/2/2 charge in Praxis. If the enemy player has more cards in their hand than you, you draw a card, and if they have less units than you, you draw a card. So I would say that this is bad because you can't depend on your opponent having more cards than you, but you do have control over how many cards you have in your hand if you're playing in a more aggressive deck. I swear, I've only been burping as soon as I start recording, I swear. Anyway, I've actually just lost my place. I'm sorry but I apologise for this video. I can't be bothered to edit through this, but you're going to have to suffer all the way through. Anyway, so yeah, you can actually control kind of how many cards you have in your hand if you're playing an aggressive deck that can really empty its hand quick. But overall, that is something that's a little bit out of your control. So if it's just that, I would say this card's pretty meh. But the fact that you also get cards for having more units than your opponent, which is something you can control a lot more, and is pretty easy to do in Praxis. Yeah, this card seems really strong. I mean, I hate to make this kind of comparison, but it does remind me of Even-Handed Golem. I think that it's not going to be too hard to draw 2 cards off of this if you're in a deck built around it. And then this is a 3-cost Even-Handed Golem with charge that doesn't actually require you to build an even-cost deck. It just requires you to build a unit swarm deck, which is the kind of deck you'd want a 2/2 that draws 2 cards for cheap in anyway. So yeah, yikes. So yeah, I'm basically thinking this with Xenon Obelisk and things like, I actually forgot the name of it. I want to say Production Line, but I don't think that's it. The 3-cost spell that summons 3/1/1 graded. You get the idea. 1/1 Swarm. Ordnance Scavenger. This one's not the best image, but at least you can read it. 6/5/5 in Racano. This is a really weird one. When you play it, you discard cards from your deck until you discard 5 power cards, and then you draw a weapon from your void that just got discarded from that ability. And it's a gunslinger. So this is so weird because, okay, so if you take it at face value, you could just say, oh hey look, it's a 6/5/5 that draws a weapon from your void. And that's a little bit underwhelming. I mean, drawing a weapon from your void is really strong with relic weapons. It's definitely worth a lot. But turn 6 is pretty late to be dropping this, and this unit has no battle skills or anything. Like, it is a decently sized body, it could be relevant. It is good bundle value, but again, 6 cost. Again, is this winning you the game? And I think not. But where this gets weird and interesting is if you try and play around the whole discarding your own cards thing. Because you do have Bullet Shaper in Racano, and again, we can go back to that whole, you could also run Jack, and then you could run, as I say, Privilege of Rank, blanked on me. But then, what else do you run with it? You can discard spells with it for Razan, again, that's another one. It's a better idea with this card, because to be fair, it could discard a whole lot more spells, but it's still a bit iffy, just discarding spells, just to give Razan lifesteal. And I don't really know what else you can do with this. There are because all the like discard synergies in Feln, and there's no Feln colours here, and it seems like too much hassle to run a 4-colour deck just to synergize with this discard. And it might work in Winchest or Ixton if you just run the 1-cost, if you discard this, play this cards, the 1-cost discard this stun unit in Primal, and the 1-cost discard this play a 2/1 that can't block in Shadow. That could be a thing, but I'm not particularly optimistic for that. So I think this card is maybe a niche thing, maybe it goes in the market every now and then of a Racano deck, but I think you really just use this to draw a weapon from your void, but then there's just better options. Like even Strange Blacksmith is a 4/3 for 4, which is honestly a better deal. And on top of that, you have the option for, if you have loads of power, you can deal damage and gain armor with it. That just seems like a almost factually better version of this card, unless you're getting discard synergy with this, which again, there isn't really any discard synergy to be had here. Oh, I did think of one thing just now, just as I said that. You could use this with the Jex Rundown Takedown card, the 3 damage that every time your opponent plays a spell you draw it back from your void, because this will put it in your void, so you wouldn't need to play it for the first time and then you draw it, so it's like drawing an extra card, so that's something. But still, there needs to be more spells in Fire and Justice, or at least one other colour, because you could go 3 colours, but I don't think you could go 4, that make this worth it. Edge of Uprising, hoo boy! This one excites me. I actually think this card might be secretly busted, but I love this card. So first of all, I want to say, an 8/6/6 relic weapon, this might be a bit of a hot take, but an 8/6/6 relic weapon is not bad. An 8/6/6 relic weapon actually can win you the game, and even if it doesn't, it often gets you a good amount of board control. And I can say this from experience, because for a long time in Ranked, and I've used this at Diamonds, so yeah, I have used this against people playing Tier 1 decks and all that, I had been playing this deck that I've just had in my collection for ages, because although it's really old, it still kind of works quite often. It's a Winchest control deck, where you run Dragonforge. It was basically one of the first decks I made in Flame Assaulter, with a bunch of different relic weapons. And in that deck, I needed some top end. I don't own Sword of the Sky King, so I ran. There's a Shadow relic weapon that's just an 8/6/6 with no ability, and it was actually not bad. Obviously, it wasn't great. It was one of the weakest cards in the deck, but it wasn't bad. It was right to run it. When I cut it, it felt worse playing the deck. I needed that top end. So, yeah, although it's not great, I would say that an 866 relic weapon with no ability is competitively viable. So keep that in mind. We don't even have to read this text yet, and this card is already, okay, maybe we could use this. The influence requirement makes it a bit yikes, but maybe. Speaking of which as well, Skycrag doesn't have any relic weapons yet, and they could actually probably do a lot with relic weapons, considering they are the faction who has both Primal's board clears and fires direct damage. It makes it very easy for them to keep the board clear so you can keep doing face damage. Anyway, so its ability is, whenever you deal damage to an enemy, draw a card, then discard a card. Wow. So, remember things like Shugo's Hooked Sword, I think it's called. That's the 7/5 relic weapon in fire that came out in Echoes of Eternity that summons a 2/2 whenever you deal damage. It is really easy to deal damage with your hero while you have a relic weapon, obviously, because you get damage dealt every time you attack with the relic weapon, but as well as that, all of your spells, all of your damage dealing spells count towards this. So basically, you just gave all of your spells, draw a card, discard a card, which is pretty exciting. It's also pretty exciting when you realise that you could make this a menace deck, make it Fire Primal Shadow, and then you could include Feln and put in things like Fel Route, and that could be pretty crazy. Definitely interesting. Now, all that aside, if you haven't read the last part of the text yet, you're probably thinking, okay, that sounds cool, but it sounds a bit out there. You're still paying 8 for this. It's pretty slow. Well then, you see the bottom part. Edge of Uprising costs 1 less for each of your units with 1 attack or less while it's in your hand. That is crazy. I actually think that's crazy busted. I remember when I first read that, I thought it must have been less than 1 attack. So I was looking at 0 attack cards in the collection that were viable to run with this card, and I was thinking 10 the Flock and all that. But no, you don't even need 0 attack units. 1 attack units will make this cost less. That's amazing. You can run, again, the production line, whatever it's called, the 3-cost summon 3/1/1 Grenadine. You can run... you could still run 10 of the Flock, honestly, with this, because you're paying 2 and you're making this cost 3 less, and you're getting a bunch of chump blockers as well, which is good because you have a relic weapon that you don't want to get hit in the face while you have it. Honestly, you don't have to build around it that much. Like, there's a lot of decks that would just have loads of 1/1s and stuff like that anyway. Like, this is just a nice, amazing card you get to add on the top. Just like a little extra bonus. I don't know, like, I want to say more about this, but I think that's just really all there is to it. You maybe run it in 3 colours with the whole Fel Route package. Maybe you just run it in Skycrag. Maybe it's a bit too hard to get the Fel Route package going with this. It is very influence intensive, because you need double fire, triple primal, and triple shadow. I know that sounds really bad, but just remember for a second that... there is that Carve It card, the 5/6/6 in Shadow, the legendary, who gives you Fire Primal Shadow influence every time he deals damage and deals 1 damage to someone whenever they end their turn. So that could fix your influence and all that. And honestly, I do think it's reasonable that by the late game you could have 2 Fire, 3 Primal, and 3 Shadow pretty consistently in a world-built control deck. You might even... I think this is a bit too much of a stretch, but it's even feasible that in that deck, because you could get so much influence from Carve It, you could run Geminon now she's been buffed. Because although Geminon is just stats, she's a lot of stats. What is she now? She's a 5/7/10 flying. Like, if they don't have a kill spell, you just win the game there. And yes, they probably do have a kill spell, but what if you run negates? Like, okay, I am going kind of into Fantasyland a little bit here, but I'm just kind of showing this card has a lot of paths it can branch out to. It's not a very secluded card. It's not, this is my one plan for this card, and if this plan doesn't work, then this card is terrible. Which means I think it has a much better shot at being a competitively viable card. I don't think this card's a meme at all. Open Contract, there's really not really anything interesting to say about this card. Because, I mean, you just run it in Stone Scar aggro. It's probably pretty good. Not that good, I suppose, but pretty good. It's going to be fast. It's going to be aggressive. Now, the one thing that might be interesting... Okay, there's 2 things that might be interesting about this card. One is, obviously, that this disables Even-Handed Golem. but I don't think that's a very big deal because usually the opponent will have played at least their first even-handed golem already by the time you've done that, which means they've already paid 2 and gotten a 2/2 and 2 cards out of it. So yeah, the next even-handed golems aren't going to work, but honestly they probably have so many cards they don't even need to play the other even-handed golems at that point. So I don't think the fact that this quote-unquote counts as even-handed golems really matters at all. But what is a bit more interesting, although I think it's mostly a meme, is you can target yourself with this. You can kill your own units to make everything in your deck cost 1 less. Now, if this was in time, that would probably be a little bit stronger, but in Stone Scar, that's probably not that good. Probably. So obviously you can just sacrifice a 1/1 with this. It could be like a Wisp as well, and you could get a card out of it. And then having everything in your deck cost 1 less is good, but like, you really have to high roll off of that. Like, for that to be worth it, you have to draw a unit that costs 1 more than you would have needed, than you would have been able to have the turn after you use this to get your tempo back. And if you're not doing it like that, you need to have units that don't really care about the cost reduction for tempo reasons. They care about the cost reduction because they're really good to play in combination with other cards, which that is a bit more reasonable, but it's also really wishful thinking in my opinion to try and go for that kind of angle. So the only way I think this could be a decent card is you run it in Winchest Sacrifice decks with Revenge and the Totemites and all that, because the Totemite Carver, whenever he draws a card, of course, if you can't play it that turn, then you lose it. So you want to make sure that all the cards in your deck are cheap enough to be able to be played when you use it. So that's the one place where I think this card makes sense, because almost every unit in that deck is tiny, and killing your own units isn't going to matter. And then making your units cheaper actually matters in that deck, because that deck wants to spam units as fast as possible. So them being cheap actually matters. And as I say, you want to be able to play anything you draw with the Carver. So aside from that, I do think that's a little bit memey. It might be a market option in that deck. If it turns out that that deck runs the 1-cost Shadow Market card, they might run this in the market. But yeah, otherwise, this card is just going to be using Stone Scar aggro. It's going to be solid, but I don't think it's going to be ridiculous. Authoritarian Creation. Now this is a little bit more interesting. I'm kind of annoyed that it's got the double justice on it, because that's just like the one thing that kind of pushes it to the point where it's going to be a little bit awkward to try and use this. But I think this could be really good, because it is only a 1-attack relic weapon, which is discouraging, and it has 5 armor, but it has +1 maximum power, which is a really good ability to have in a relic weapon, in my opinion. And the second ability is actually kind of amazing for a relic weapon. You and your units are invulnerable to damage from spells. Oh my god. This is what I needed. This is what I needed to just deal with all the Skycrag spell decks. Now, actually, it doesn't really do that much against it. Well, I mean, it helps out, definitely, but Guard of Romance does have the kill and attachment spell, which would kill this regardless, so yeah, it kind of sucks. But if you wait for them to play their Guard of Romance and they don't have a second one, you can play this and be safe from Prodigious Sorcery, and then if you're controlled it, you at least have a chance against the Skycrag spell damage deck. So anyway, I think this mostly is just a great card because that second ability is really strong. Like, the weakness of relic weapons is them just chucking a torch at your face and they don't care how many units you have to block. You've lost your relic weapon. But now, that isn't going to do anything. So yeah, this card seems pretty good. The main issue is, on its own, it's pretty weak, but I think that it is worth it to try and buff this card up. Maybe you run this in Creation colours and you run Soul Drain Smithing, which you give this +1 attack. You run Display of Creation, which gives this... Oh no, that gives it armour. It gives a unit plus attack, never mind. There's another card that... it's the new card in Argenport, you're going to see in a second, that's going to be interesting with this. There's definitely ways that this card could actually be very strong. It's a building block for a deck that could be ridiculously good, but we've not got all the pieces yet, so we're going to have to see how well we can kind of cobble it together for now and see if it actually is good enough to be competitive. I think it will be. and I know I'm kind of saying this loads and loads throughout this thing, but I don't think it's going to be super high tier. Again, I'm kind of thinking tier 3 for this card. Rolling Spike back. Oh boy, this card kind of makes me a little bit sad, because if this card didn't have Aegis, this would be an amazing card. But but it didn't have Reckless. No, the Aegis is what makes this good. So a 3/3/1 Aegis is actually a pretty good stat line, and the fact that it gives you back a random dinosaur, as well as being a dinosaur itself, which is actually a relevant tag, it would be very promising, but that Reckless really destroys this unit. Aegis and Reckless is a terrible combination, because what you would have is a nice aggressive unit that is going to be hard for your opponent to remove, but the fact that it's Reckless means that your opponent just plays a 1/1 and then it attacks into the 1/1 and dies. Like, there are so many easy ways to get 1/1s in so many colours that it's going to be very rare that this unit doesn't just die to a 1/1. And that's especially sad considering that this requires double primal. So this is a 3 influence card on 3. And you don't really get a massive benefit from it. Now obviously, the big part of this is the fact that you get another card back after you play it. The only way this really works is, in my opinion, is if you can... There's 2 ways this works, actually. One, if you have a deck that cares about having loads of dinosaurs, because I think this on its own just kind of sucks, but if you have loads of dinosaurs on the board, and I'm trying to think... It's been so long since I played dinosaurs, I don't remember if there's any card that just buffs all your dinosaurs, but if there is like a competitive card that buffs all your dinosaurs, then that makes sense to play this and then play the card you get off of this and then play that buff card, but that's expensive, so that's going to be late game kind of plays. The other way this works is, of course, with the best card with dinosaur synergy, Twilight Hunt, because if you give this killer, then the Reckless doesn't matter as much. And also giving it +2/+2 means that they can't just block this with 1/1s, they at least need a 3 attack unit. And then it's at least a little bit less sad when this is forced to attack into something that can easily kill it. There is I think there was a 5/3/3 dinosaur in Xenon that gives all your other dinosaurs +1/+1 as long as you have it, and it has Ambush at Night. I think there's that card. But I don't think that card's good enough. Yeah, I wish this card was better. It just doesn't seem that great. Spire Shadows. Okay, so this is probably the weirdest card in the set, and there are some weird ones in this set. It's not a great quality image, but I'll tell you what it does anyway. It is a 2-cost spell. It's slow, but it's Xenon, and you swap the attack and cost of every unit in your deck. So, for example, Campfire Watchman, which you didn't know is a 2-cost 0/6 with no abilities in Primal, would become a 0-cost 2/6. You can probably see how this can get very interesting. I was looking through the collection earlier to see expensive cards with low attack. And to be fair, there aren't that many that are insane, but there are definitely some that look promising. There's Relia, who I'm trying to remember. I've never played this card, and I've only played against it once or twice, so I might get its abilities a little bit wrong. But I'm pretty sure it was an 8/3/3 Injustice that is invulnerable to damage, has double damage, it has endurance, and when you draw it, if you don't have at least 2 power cards in your hand, she gives you a Justice Sigil or something like that. Point is, basically, she's a tiny unit, but she's invulnerable to damage, so the idea is she just kind of pokes constantly. But with this, she becomes an 8/3 for 3 that's invulnerable to damage and has double damage and endurance. That is kind of terrifying. There's also the idea of just running this with smaller units to make them nice and cheap. This with a kind of even deck. Now, the problem with using this in an even deck, and this doesn't mean that it's a terrible idea necessarily, but it just means it's not going to be as strong, is that once you play this, you've bricked your golems unless you've calculated your deck so that every single unit will still cost an even amount after swapping the cost and attack, which is, I think it's going to be a little bit too difficult to make a deck that has good units when you swap their attack and attack and cost, that are still even cost. But if you can do that, then that's kind of insane, because there've been ones like this isn't an even one, but there's a 3-1-4 unit that's usually too weak in Xenon that you can pay 2 and exhaust it to sacrifice a unit and draw a card, and it has pledge. That when you play this becomes a 1-3-4, which is obviously a lot better. So you can see how while that isn't as big a deal, this can be very relevant with some smaller units, because although, as I say, that isn't as big a deal, if you're drawing loads of cards, and if all those cards are like 1-3-4s and all that, then it's a pretty big deal. So yeah, I want to say more about this, but honestly, it's kind of hard to see what you would use this for. I think the big thing that might make this card actually be super strong might not actually be the normal way of using it, to just use it with cards that have lower high costs and low attack. Although that's obviously the most straightforward way to use it. You might use it with cards that aren't even necessarily that expensive or that low attack, but just if you reduce their cost by a little bit, they become super powerful, because they might be cards that are amazing if you can combine them with other cards, but are super expensive, so it's difficult for you to actually have enough power to do so. But when you do this, it actually becomes feasible. So that might actually be how this card ends up getting kind of busted. As crazy as this card is, I don't think it's actually think it's that strong. I think it's strong, but I don't think it's going to be super high tier or anything. Again, I'm repeating myself again, I feel like a lot of cards in this set are kind of around the tier 2, tier 3 kind of area. Volant Core. As simple as this card is, I really like it. There's a few things that are a little bit weird about it, but it's a 5/4/2 in Horu. Sadly, you do need 2 of each influence, but it has Killer and Overwhelm, and it's invulnerable to damage on your turn. Now, when I first looked at this, I thought, okay, sadly, Horu got the filler card. Oh well, better luck next expansion and all that. But then I kind of looked at this again, and I'm like, actually, that's not bad. Like, that really isn't bad, because since it's invulnerable to damage on your turn, and I did realise this when I first read it, but I didn't realise how good it was. Since it's invulnerable to damage on your turn, not only does that mean this can safely attack, but as well as that, since it has Killer, it means this is essentially a 5/4/2 Overwhelm, deal 4 damage. Which, that actually seems pretty decent, considering 4 damage in this game is worth about 4 power. Bundling that with a 4/2 body's worth about 3. You know, that's 7. And then bundle value, I mean, more than 7. That's actually pretty good. Like, obviously, this isn't that high above the curve, but, you know, in theory, it is. It's, like, about worth 8 power. It's just that, obviously, there are other things that are above the curve even more. Now, the other thing that's kind of interesting about this is that Overwhelm is a keyword that you don't see in Horu too often. The only other Horu card that I think has Overwhelm is the Dying Sun Prophecy, that really weird card, that 6-cost relic, where if you have played a curse and a relic, and a cursed relic in the same turn, sorry, a curse and a relic in the same turn, and if you play a cursed relic, it counts as both, then it plays it for free. And while you have it, whenever you have an exhausted unit at the end of your turn, you give it +1/+1 and Overwhelm. Anyway, sorry. So the reason why having Overwhelm in Horu is actually kind of important is because one of the weaknesses of Horu is you have no real direct damage. You don't really have any over the top. Unless you're like running a weird thing like Provoke the Dragons in the market, but usually you can't afford a market space for something like that. Or you're running a much greedier control deck that runs... Channel the Tempest, I think it is. The 9, draw 3, and then deal damage equal to the amount of cards in your hand. But this is something that isn't that hard to run in your deck, that allows you to deal direct damage. Well, not technically, but it's very likely that they'll have a unit on the board with less than 4 health, which means you'll get Overwhelmed damage through. Now, obviously that's not a lot of damage, so you might say that doesn't really matter that much, especially because it's dependent on the board. But then, you can buff this card. Like, Justice has hand buff tools, and although they've never been super strong, I don't think they've ever been terrible or anything. With any kind of hand buffing abilities, whether it's with Dinosaur Synergy, because this is a Paladin and a Dinosaur, or whether it's just normal hand buff, you could make this deal a lot of damage to face. And then, of course, after the initial attack, they've still got an Overwhelm unit to deal with that they can't damage on your turn, so they have to kill it on their turn with like direct damage spells and all that, or kill spells. Now, the last thing I want to bring up with this card is the fact that it's a paladin. This is a weird combination of keywords, paladin and dinosaur. I don't think you can make both of these work at the same time, but you can make individual decks that capitalize on either. I think the tradition dinosaurs, because you'd have to go time, because the best dinosaur synergy is in time. The tradition dinosaurs deck sounds a bit far-fetched. I don't think it's going to be unplayable, but I don't think it's going to be very competitive. The paladin kind of variant, though, that's interesting. I'm not sure if it's going to be worth splashing a third colour just for this one paladin, because I think this is the only paladin that isn't in Argenport colours, just a shadow. I mean, it's still Injustice, but I don't think there's any kind of paladin in Primal or Fire or Time except this one in Primal at all. So it's weird to add an extra colour just to use this card, but this card with paladin synergy seems pretty strong, because Paladin is probably one of the most relevant tags in the game because of the 2/1/3 lifesteal that gives a Paladin in your hand bond. They also play a 1/1 weapon on a Paladin whenever you play one, but that's not as important. Although that is pretty good with this because, again, attack buffs, which means you get more damage to face with the Overwhelm. This is mostly super good because you can play this for ridiculously cheap. You can theoretically play this for free if you have enough attack on the board. Bond is a super strong keyword, except the only reason why the Bond cards aren't that strong for the most part is because most of them are really bad cards because they know it's a super strong keyword. So when you can give it to cards that aren't supposed to have Bond, it makes them have a lot more potential. So yeah, this card is surprisingly interesting for such a basic design. The Nightmare Gates. So this is the Argenport card I was talking about earlier, which I think could work with the Combrag card quite well. When you first look at this looks absolutely insane, but I actually think this is relatively balanced. I actually think that if this card is insane, it's going to be nothing to do with the fact it costs 0. It's going to be to do with the fact that it gives you a relic weapon +5/+5. +5/+5 is a massive buff. Like, illicit armaments, even though it isn't a super competitive card, because if you don't have a relic weapon, it's a dead card. I ran it for a little bit in my relic weapon deck until I realised that it was a dead card too often. And when I could play it on my relic weapon, it was really strong. Like, giving you relic weapon +4/+2, I think it was, for 2. So giving a relic weapon +5/+5 for 0 is going to be really good. Especially with any relic weapon that is good to keep around for a long time and really benefits from buffs. Like the 1/5 relic weapon, which constantly gives you more power and makes him vulnerable to spell damage as long as it doesn't break. So yeah, you could run a deck, I think, where you constantly draw relic weapons back from your void and you buff them up and continuously just build them up. And I think it's obviously going to be Corendon. That it left my head for a second. I wanted to say Winchest. A Corendon deck, a Time Justice Shadow deck. I think that's what it's going to be. Now, obviously, you're going to need quite a lot of influence, but I think there's enough influence fixing in the game in those colours that you could pull it off and it won't be too hard. I think this is probably a market card, and I think it's worth putting in your market. Yes, this suffers the same problem as illicit armaments, where it's just a completely dead card if you can't play it, and this is going to be dead even more often because you need a unit to sacrifice that you don't mind sacrificing. You need 6 influence and you need to have a relic weapon out. But at the same time, illicit armaments wasn't worth a spot in the market because even when you did get the stars to align, although it was pretty strong, it wasn't worth a spot in the market. This one I think will be worth a spot in the market, so I think that won't hold it back. I think this card is going to be pretty strong. Lastly, for the non-neutral cards, we have Counterfeiter, which I'm basically going to say, for the most part, I think this card is going to be a meme for now. I don't think this card is a real card in this game. I don't think it's really going to do very well. Not until more cards that actually care about tags are printed. And not that many have really been printed, so I'm not holding out hope. Although I do think it will happen eventually, just not anytime soon. So this is a 2/2/2 in Feln, and you choose one of your units, and Counterfeiter becomes its type. Wow, that's terrible. Why wouldn't you just run like Massmaker or something? But then all units that you own have the same type as Counterfeiter. So basically, you choose a unit, now all of your units are that type. Including Counterfeiter himself, so this won't be a rogue by the time you play it. So there are two things that make this card possibly useful. There's one, I think it's Preserver of Dualities. This with Preserver of Dualities will summon a full board of 1/1 Wisps, apparently. The other thing, which I haven't heard anyone mention, but I'm interested in, is by this wording, it sounds like everything, since it says all units you own, this will include units in your deck and in your hand and your void. Now this is relevant, because what if you do this on a Paladin? I was just talking about how Paladin is such an important tag. This with Paladins means you could run a deck where you could give any card Bond, which does seem like a really big deal. That means you can theoretically play any card for free. Now, obviously you need to have a big unit on the board for it to be free if it's a more expensive card, but that's still pretty crazy. Now, I don't think it's actually super competitive because it seems very hard to set up, and you would have to run Justice Primal Shadow. But it could be worth it. I definitely think it's not completely uncompetitive. I think it could be competitive, but just not super strong competitive. Low end of tier 3. It's pretty memey overall, but it's interesting. Other than that, I don't really have much to say about this card, because like the normal things you do with this are just super weak. Like maybe you would do it with Onis, that would help you activate Oni ally stuff and all that, but then Onis are in just Fire and Justice, which doesn't fit with these colours. It seems really weird this is double colours. This feels like it should be a neutral card. This does not feel like a Feln card. I think putting this in Feln really is a death sentence to this card. It's so hard to make this work with anything worthwhile. Yeah, oh man, it's difficult to use that. Speaking of... but enough about difficult to use cards. I'm actually about to say the opposite of what I meant. We have World Shaper's Staff, which this card, a lot of people kind of seem to have a bit of a meh reaction to this. I think this card is pretty crazy and probably the second best card in the set. And I think this can be used in a variety of decks, not just mono decks. So, just to clear something up, if you just read the text, I'll read it for you. I'll just read it now anyway. When the wielder dies, draw a card and gain one of each influence. Summon, play a 7/7 Prism Golem. Now, oh wait, I think that's not what it's supposed to be called. I think they changed the name of it, but that doesn't matter much. Now, after reading that, you may be like, wait, why would no one think this is super powerful? Well, because the 7/7 Prism Golem has an ability, and it's not very good. The ability is that for every type of influence you have, it has -2/-2. So unless you have no influence, this will never be a 7/7. If you have one kind of influence, it will be a 5/5. If you have two kinds, it will be a 3/3. If you have three kinds, it will be a 1/1. If you have any more than three kinds of influence, this won't summon anything. Well, it will, but it will just die instantly, so it'll be as if you hadn't summoned anything anyway. That might have some interactions, though, with, like, certain cards. I don't know. It doesn't really matter too much. So, most people are just like, okay, maybe you run it in mono then. Now, one thing that is important to point out is, since this gives you one of each influence when it breaks, that means that after you get the first 5/5 from this, if you're playing mono, every single other one after that won't summon a 5/5, because you've already gotten all the influence from this once it breaks. So, now you won't get any units from this, because they'll just instantly become 0/0s. Anyway, so yeah, this card in mono, obviously crazy. You're getting a 1/1 weapon that gives you a card when it dies, gives you influence, and summons a 5/5. And as I said, I already said before, yes, it only works the first time, but really think about it. How much is that gonna matter? Like, even if you get one of these once the first one's already broken, it's not a dead card. You're paying 3, and you're putting a 1/1 weapon on a unit that gives you a card when the unit dies, and also gives you more influence. That's actually pretty relevant, especially, again, mono decks. They need a lot of a certain type of influence, usually. So, you could actually use that influence, and drawing a card and giving a unit +1/+1, like, although the card is an instant, that's probably worth about 2 power. So, doing it for 3 isn't that bad a deal, especially for a neutral card with no influence requirements. And I think that's definitely worth having that as a slightly below average card in your deck, but the first time you play it, it's a way above average card because it's a 1/1 that summons a 6/6 that sorry, not a 6/6, a 5/5 that also gives you a card when it dies and gives you influence. That seems really strong. And then even if you're not running mono, this is still pretty strong. Again, a 1/1 with a 3/3, you're still getting an above average card and getting a card draw when the wielder of this dies. And of course, weapon synergy is really good with all this stuff. You draw even more cards. And I would even go as far as to say this is probably playable in destruction decks. Yeah, 3-color decks. A 3-color deck could actually use this. I don't think any other real deck, except maybe Winchester Sacrifice, could use this. But basically, a 3/1/1 weapon that gives you one of each influence, that draws you a card when it breaks, and also summons a 1/1 for you, is probably good enough. Because you're going to need those sacrifice targets, so you don't care it's a 1/1. And the influence is going to be amazing in a 3-color deck because you're going to be much more scared about not having the influence you need. And then there's even talk of what if you run this in a 5-color deck. I think that's a bit more memey, but it still makes sense. Like, in a 5-color deck, you're really going to be worried about influence quite a lot. And a 3/1/1 weapon, again, draws you a card when it breaks and gives you one of each influence. That's going to be pretty strong. I think that this fits into so many decks, and I think that people have really underrated this so far because most people have just been like, yeah, it seems alright, you run it in mono. And they don't seem to think you would run it in anywhere else, and I think you do. I think this is especially good because although it's only one, it pushes damage instantly on whatever unit you have on the board, and obviously there's a lot of weapon synergy, so it can do more than that. But it also summons a second target for your opponent to kill. So this is only really weak to board clears, like Harsh Rule and all that. And even then, it's not even really weak to board clears, because when all your units die, you still get a card back. Like, this compensates for basically every situation. You have a unit on the board already, well, that's great. You get the 1 damage instantly. You don't have enough units on the board, or one of your units is too big or something like that. Well, that's great, because I'm going to summon another big unit that your opponent has to kill. Oh, what? Your opponent killed all your units? Oh, well, I still even have a backup plan for that. You're drawing a card and you get a bunch of influence. It feels like there's nowhere this card is terrible, except for, obviously, like, 3-colored decks that don't want 1/1s to sacrifice, and even then, they might want the influence fixing. And, yeah. This just seems really, really good. Finally, ending on a really weird one. Wrath of Caiaphas. It's a legendary spell and it's neutral and it costs 7. Each player discards their hand and draws 7 cards. And you can pay 2 to swap Wrath of Caiaphas from your hand with a random power card from your deck. So this card is... Well, I already said it, but I have to say it again. This card is really weird. Like, really weird. Because... I feel like I can't be right when I'm predicting with this card. Paying 7 to make both players discard their hand and draw 7 cards sucks. Like, it's a slow spell too, which makes it even worse. This is such a bad deal, because you would have to put in a lot of work to put yourself in a position where you're drawing enough cards that this is worth it. And if you do put in all that work, then this is a bit of an underwhelming reward. But at the same time, no influence requirements, so that makes it flexible. But then, maybe you would just prefer it to have influence requirements and be more powerful. Because I feel like this is such a late game card, you would probably have a lot of influence by the time you play it, so it doesn't really matter it doesn't have an influence requirement. At least not much. But then, here's the thing that mostly kind of confuses me with this. You can pay 2 to swap this with a power card from your deck. That sounds like a very small benefit, but I think this card that actually makes this card go from unplayable to, oh, huh. I have no idea if this is going to be one of the best cards in the game or one of the worst cards in the game. Because here's the thing. It sounds really bad to pay 2 to get rid of a card in your hand and get a power card from your deck. But Zoe of the Endless Horde gives you Treasure Trove. And I can tell you for certain that that's the reason why he's good. If Zoe did not give you Treasure Trove, Zoe would suck. Because the whole reason So is good is because you can pay 2 to basically replace him with another card from your deck if you don't want him in that situation. It sounds like it wouldn't matter that much, but Zo is one of the best control cards out there because of the whole flexibility he provides. He just helps you win in games that you wouldn't have won otherwise. Because again, if you need a big threat, then he's a big threat that can win you the game possibly. And if you don't need a big threat and you just need to cycle through your deck to desperately search for something to save your life, he gives you that too. And this can kind of give you the same thing, especially because this is guaranteed to get you a power card, so it helps you out in the situation of I don't have enough power to cast this, which is a very likely situation. But with Zo, you are getting card advantage in the end, and with this you're not getting card advantage in the end. You're losing the ability to play this. When you play the Treasure Trove from Zo, you don't lose the ability to play Zo. But at the same time, it's not that common in my experience that you play both the Treasure Trove and Zo. It is kind of common, but it's not common that you need both. Usually you only need one or the other, and I only use both if it's just convenient. I could also use the Treasure Trove. So, it's so hard to say with this card. Just paying 2 to swap a card is just such a hard to evaluate effect, because this card essentially has become a blank card in your deck. It's almost like that. You have to sacrifice some tempo, but you have a 71 card deck instead of a 75 card deck, which is actually good because it increases consistency. So yeah, for all you people who are making 150 card decks, yeah, that's actually not a great idea. I see you. I see one ladder. What do you think you're up to? Anyway, now, that's enough of talking about the whole swap thing. I do think that's the biggest thing about this card, even though it sounds super weak. I think that's the defining feature that's going to separate whether this card becomes ridiculously good or, it's not going to be that good at all. As for the main ability, quote-unquote, where you discard your hand and draw 7 cards, so in terms of discarding your opponent's hand, this doesn't matter much. It does put things into their void for Savage Incursion, but, well, that's pretty slow. Like, you're paying 7, and if they've got like a 4-card hand, which I'd say is pretty average by the late game, or 3-card, then you're not really putting that many things in their void. And as well as that, if they haven't got that many cards, you're also drawing them cards when you don't want to do that. And so it seems like the only way to make this worth it is either to run a deck where you're very likely to have an empty hand, but it's also a control deck, which is kind of weird. The only thing I could really think of that fits that description is Argent Port Control, the whole thing I was saying, because that deck doesn't really have any draw, but it survives off of the warp that you get from End of the Line, which I don't think most lists run, but I run End of the Line. End of the Line and Saditi. I would also run End of the Story, but I don't have that card yet. And I'm not exactly crafting it since it's so similar to Harsh Rule. Not until I have more essential cards. Man, I don't know how long I've been talking. My throat is dying. But yeah, this will discard your whole hand, and that will make it so that the only way that I think you can make this really good is by having a hand that wants to be discarded. Stuff obviously like Fel Route. Maybe this gets played in Reanimator. It does seem really slow for Reanimator, but then you got to remember that Reanimator lost a lot of consistency now that you can't run Grasping at Shadows in both the market and the main deck. And this card does improve consistency. So there's a chance it's actually right in Reanimator, but I don't think it would be like a 4-of. I keep saying it, but this is just such a weird card. I think it will see competitive play. I don't think it will see that much. I think that's all I want to say about it. Wow, I think I'm finally done. So yeah, I didn't think that would be quick, but I didn't think I'd spend that long talking about everything. But hopefully, you at least found this kind of entertaining. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.